Disruption, Episode 8. In this episode, Maggie and I reflect on our experience at ITEC 2017, particularly Buddy Berry's keynote address. Welcome to Friendly Disruption, live from ITEC. We got a really fancy setup here this week. We're really excited. A little different show. Maggie, introduce yourself.
Hey there, Maggie Pickett here. First time at ITEC. I'm really impressed with the setup.
So we're here, and we've just seen Buddy Berry's keynote, and I got a chance to talk to Buddy a little bit. In fact, I'm going to move my mic a little bit so I don't have to face away from Maggie as we talk. There we go. That seems more organic. Again, I've seen this keynote once before, but he knocked it out of the park again. I don't know, Maggie, based upon what you remember from visiting with Buddy about it, our last episode, what jumps out to you? I can tell you a couple of things that always jump to me, but I'm always interested to see people who haven't maybe seen him quite as much.
Well, Craig, I feel like I had heard all of his keynote from all the fun stories that you've told me, because you've seen him obviously more than I have. But the way he says it, his passion, his energy is unmatchable. He has this way of capturing a room that it was incredible. But I think my takeaway is, I don't work in the classroom anymore. I support adults and adult learners. And so my takeaway was, maybe I need to have a yes and attitude toward those adult learners that I'm working with. And so I think that was my big takeaway. It was kind of an aha.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I had a similar sort of moment too. And I think, if you get to hang around this business long enough, and gosh, it seems weird to say, I've been doing this for over 20 years now, and there are a few moments in my career I look back where you have sort of these aha moments. And I'd say a couple of them. There was one a couple of years ago when I sat in that OSEP meeting with you, and I went, oh my gosh, I'm doing things wrong in terms of thinking about assistive technology and personalized learning and all this stuff. And
I got to tell you, I walked away from that meeting thinking, man, this guy hates me.
I don't know. That's interesting. I wonder if I have that effect on people at times. I'm a little intense, it's true. But at the same time, I walked out of there thinking, wow, I've been doing my job wrong up to this point. And the reason why I bring that up is that, after as I told you, our district leadership team went to Eminence this summer, and kind of walking through and getting real boots on the ground feeling for what happens there. I had that. It wasn't quite the same intensity, but I had that same sort of feeling, and I'm thinking more and more about how do I engage with my focus has been so strongly about kids. Pardon me. But I've been thinking more and more about how do I connect and engage with our staff in a different way. And, I've been doing simple things like, it's the visibility stuff, getting out, talking to people, getting in positions that are kind of uncomfortable for someone like a district technology director to walk into a classroom and to, have a conversation with kids and teachers. And I've been trying to do that. And it's surprisingly hard. But, it's important. I think it pays you back in a ton of different ways.
I think so too. But it's that's interesting. We had a similar.
Yeah. So moment. As I look at it, and I look and I see their graduate profile, that's something that's on my mind an awful lot.
He didn't talk much about that today.
No.
And we actually used Eminence, the video, to share with we're putting together in the Cedar Rapids Community School District a new technology plan,
Great.
A 5-year plan. And so we put the Ed Hub video out there, which is a video that Eminence put out regarding its new facility, I think. So just to kind of get people thinking, and we realized that, wow, it can be kind of hard to think outside of the box. I'm sorry, think with no box, I think is what Buddy referred to today. But some of that, I think, is just because we are so confined to our box. But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. but I'm going to throw it back to you on that one.
Well, no, I mean, I think the big thing was we were talking about the graduate profile, and I saw your strategic plan. I hadn't seen the Cedar Rapids strategic plan until you inserted that slide in our slide deck for our presentation earlier today. And yeah, I mean, you can see Buddy's fingerprints all over that thing, right?
Right.
I mean, down to the puzzle pieces. But I think the core elements are aligned the same way. And, you know, I love the idea. In our session earlier this morning, we spent some time talking about sort of MTSS and that multi-tier system of supports and how that plays into using digital tools and the idea that, you know, there should be a universal tier on this, that all kids should have access to at least some common type of tool that allows them choice. I mean, you know, going back to the keynote today, which not everybody listening to this probably saw, but Buddy gives a great story about his son walking into a bathroom at a new outlet mall and seeing three urinals that are all short urinals, and his son is very young, he's 3 years old, and he's delighted and surprised by this, or as Buddy would say, surprised and delighted. And this notion that he got to choose which urinal to go to rather than having it pre-selected for him, and that being such a powerful notion. So where I'm going with that is that if we have these universal tiers of supports for our students that are digital, so, you know, as I talk all the time, you know, here in Iowa, we've got 70% or more of our schools with a one-to-one situation where every one of our kids has a device. Simply giving the child the option of saying, here's how I want to consume that content. I want to listen to it rather than read it. Yeah. I want to dictate this rather than type it. Yeah. Those can be world-changing difference makers, right?
I think the reality, though, that we have to face, and I hate being the realist sometimes, but as we think about a multi-tiered system and universal supports, even thinking about Buddy and his school and personalized learning, all of these things are really genuinely amazing for kids if they're done, and not even done well, like Buddy was saying.
Yeah.
But my realist always goes back to, and I'll continue with the urinal story, if a student with a disability were to roll up in their wheelchair, or how are we creating from the get-go opportunity for kids with disabilities to access and engage at all of these levels. And I think that unless we are being in personalized learning extremely intentional about access and put assurances in our system when we're building it, then we're always going to be exclusive.
No, that's a great point. And sometimes I get a little too practical with this stuff, and it's easy for me to take it right into a quick resolution of thinking about, well, if we get this text digitally, we're nearly done. And it's probably not, it's not inclusive enough to think that way. But, you know, I think if I have any sort of influence back home at college community, one of the things that I really like to push on and have been pushing on recently is universal design, UDL. Because I think that particularly if you're serious about personalized learning, I don't know that there's a more foundational skill you can have than the UDL framework to get that done, because it's about choice, it's about consuming and interacting with content differently, engaging with content differently, not based upon the essentialness of it, although we certainly need to be thinking about those things. I mean, it's like we would say, it's essential for some and it's good for all. But at the same time, if our teachers, like you said, if our teachers aren't designing that from the get-go, as you're starting to create the instruction, it becomes not only harder, but it really gets in the way, and it's counterproductive, right? Right,
exactly. And I think that's where some of the thoughts around personalized learning kind of really come into play, where you're really talking about, you get to the points where you have a personal learning plan, and you have some of these things, and you are working with the student on self-agency, so they're able to say, hey, out of all the tools you've shown us, I have to have my text reader. Yeah. Otherwise, I know I'm not going to be successful. Yeah. But it's that teaching that skill starts so early, and sometimes we just kick the can down the road. Oh, they'll learn that next year, and I think it's essential to really start building some of that self-determination.
Let's widen that lens out, though, because even for those kids who absolutely have to do that it's essential. I can tell you as a parent of 3 kids right now, if you talk about one skill that I would want all 3 of my kids to have, it's that skill above all others almost. I mean, that's maybe a bit of hyperbole, but it's close because of the fact that if you can self-advocate and you understand your strengths and you're metacognitive about those things, you're going to be successful. You're going to find a path to success no matter what limitations you're set up against. And I think about people, I look around, I see people who are successful, they do that. I mean, it's not, school's really an artificial, I mean, we say this all the time, but it's an artificial construct. This notion that we're going to run everybody through, as Buddy said, through a factory model and push out the same product, when in fact, when we go into the workspace, everybody caters to their own strengths. Everybody does. And particularly people who are high functioning, they tend to put themselves in a position where their strengths come through and shine through. And we should be doing that for our kids. I mean, why aren't we? Mm-hmm. And I understand that's much easier said than done. And everybody in principle would say, yeah, that's a good thing. And I understand it's hard to do. But that's that yes and thinking. Because if we understand that's important, then why aren't we doing it?
Absolutely.
Right?
But you take it into the, our adult learners as well. And I always, our teachers, when they're learning a new skill, some are going to hold on to that skill and fly with it. And others are going to be, just because of their skills and what they know is is more practical for them to know or learn, they're going to maybe not fly with it. And so I think having that perspective, again, going back to, we're not only talking about students or learners here as learners, but also adults as learners, and allowing ourselves and giving ourselves permission to be more directive about the work that we do. Yeah,
and I think the other thing, and this would be something that came across with Buddy's keynote, is the permission to fail, right?
Yes.
That idea that's how we learn, and it's okay, and you're never satisfied with failure. But I've always hated, and I've been in meetings where people have shown that Apollo 13 clip where failure is not an option, talking about kids, and I understand the passion that's derived from that, but I think that's a really counterproductive message, because failure should always be celebrated. In that that's how you get better, that's how you innovate, and now certainly when it comes time to think about kids and what do we expect and what do we have with kids, there's a really good chance that we don't certainly want to let kids slip through the cracks, but I do worry that sometimes we give the message that boy, we gotta buckle down, and particularly as teachers, I think there's a culture of not wanting to fail either.
Absolutely. And I think going back to Buddy, he basically said they were at the bottom of the barrel,
Yeah.
And as far as their scores that they were reporting out. And so they had permission.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
they didn't need permission.
Else, yeah.
There was nowhere else to go but up. And
Yeah.
so how as districts who aren't in that position, how do we look for permission or find permission or find ways to change the conversation?
Yeah, it's the yes and conversation, right, all over again. Yeah, the other thing, and going back to our previous episode, I'll put a plug in for that too, that our last episode where we had Buddy on, and I can't remember if it came up in actually the conversation or if we had that conversation offline afterwards. So maybe you recollect, you're a little younger than I am.
Yeah, I have mom brain.
But but the fact is that he talked. Buddy talks a lot about micro-credentialing. Did we talk about that? And that's a really cool idea. This idea that they have all this sort of practical stuff out there in their Ed Hub. They've got band saws, table saws, button makers, all this stuff, and the kids get micro-credentialed for that, and so they get the ability to independently use those tools after some intensive training. But you think about what that means in terms of giving kids the ability to sort of shape and change their environment, based upon thinking about large problems. I mean, that's the sort of organizational flexibility I think is really interesting.
Absolutely. And I think back to when I was a kid, I wish I could have had a micro credential, looking back, in gardening.
Yeah.
I never learned how to garden, but yet I'm paying someone else to grow my vegetables. But no, I think, but then again, I'm gonna flip it on its head. for micro-credentialing students and allowing them to kind of get these areas of passion, why don't we do that for our adults?
Well, exactly.
I think we need to take advantage, work smarter, not harder. And if people have a passion area, let's let them do that. I think it's just, but it's taking these conversations and putting it into, buddy, close your ears, a box. Because we are, in every reality, we are living within a box.
Yeah, there are some practical realities, and that's the limiting fact is that, the analogy I always make, and I've said it here on this podcast a couple of times, but Weight Watchers doesn't have trade secrets, right? It's the idea that coaching is really at the core of this, and that to change behavior, you have to do it with intention. You need someone there to sort of guide you through it, and you have to expect that you're not going to do that well. And that's the reality of it, is that's the we need to set up those types of structures, I think, for people in order to make these sort of significant changes. And that's not in our DNA as teachers, because there's a certain sort of close the door and smile, or the independent contractor mentality, which when I was in the classroom, I totally get. I mean, it's pardon me, it's very much the nature of the work, but at the same time, those supports are critical for making these types of changes. So, well, I don't know. I'm thinking a bit more about Buddy's keynote in terms of.
Are you a penguin, or are you a polar bear?
I don't know. That's a great question. I would give a shout out to, as I did when we were in the session, to Noreen Bush, who is the ultimate penguin.
Absolutely.
I don't know that I'm as high energy as Buddy, but I think I'm passionate, and so I think I hate to think of myself as a polar bear. I just can't. But I'm also an iconoclast. I mean, I hate fitting in. I hate being put in a category. So I don't know that I could say that I'm a penguin either. Maybe I'm a walrus. I don't know.
There you go.
A seal. It's a little more flattering.
I love that analogy, though.
Yeah.
It was, again, it's just he's used a lot of powerful visuals today to kind of get everybody into his story and where Eminence is going with their school district.
One regret I have for today is I'm sorry we couldn't have a little more time before we had to do this live show to get around to see some of the other sessions, because it would have been great to give some updates on those directly. We had to go basically right from our session to the keynote to up here, so I have to apologize to anybody who's listening that we don't have any sort of uber insights from new learning from this, but I think there's some really interesting things coming up. I know that tomorrow one of Buddy's teachers is going to be doing the keynote tomorrow, and I'm really interested in seeing how that's going to play together and get a view from another penguin in that system, so to speak, and hear what they do with kids on a more interesting note.
Will you be sending or tweeting out the slide deck from today?
Yeah, I sure will do that. That's a great idea. Maggie and I did a presentation which wasn't really about the podcast, but was more about some more content. We shared a lot more tools, things we'd used, snap and read and write, all things we've talked about here in the past, mostly in the context of things like UDL and accessible educational materials. Some concrete examples from how we're doing it at Prairie with our 3-tier approach of looking at provisioning, professional learning, and conversion of existing materials, and then looking at the Cedar Rapids strategic plan. So some real good nuts and bolts stuff. We'll make sure that gets out there and people can look at that, because that's a great resource.
I think we're doing a lot of great networking here. I know Craig's going to be here for the next day and a half, and I'm actually heading up to Closing the Gap, where I will meet up with a few friends of mine from across the country. So hopefully we'll get some additional guests lined up for next month.
Well, yeah, I think that's exciting. And I also got a text, I haven't even told you this yet, I got a text from Cheryl Kibbers just confirming that we're going to the, is it ATIA show in Orlando in late January, early February. So it's a National Assistive Tech show. And so that's we're looking forward to heading down there and getting a bunch of new learning and a bunch of new networking done. Before we kind of wrap up today, I did have something else stream across my Facebook timeline today too that seems appropriate, given that we don't have a guest on today. And that's today is Kevin Honeycutt's 51st birthday.
Oh, well, happy birthday,
So happy
Kevin.
birthday, Kevin. I wish you were here. Hopefully you're having a good time on your birthday in Colorado Springs with Gibson and the rest of your family. But with that, I think we're probably going to wrap up. We're about out of time here in the room, and we'll have another episode coming out here in November, and we'll have more conversation. We'll probably share some more concrete tools, probably something we've picked up from ITEC or Closing the Gap, and we'll go from there.
And thank you to all the ITEC folks for having hosting us here today. This was a lot of fun.
The setup's incredible.
Amazing.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Don't forget, follow us on Twitter at FDisruption, and our podcast link you probably already have, so I don't need to give that. So
All right.
take care,
care.
everybody.